Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and for the first time in almost a month, we could say that the United States House of Representatives has a speaker again. In fact, I was just reading an article before we went on air, and it's a political article, and they're interviewing diplomats after Representative Mike Johnson was elected to be House Speaker, and they quote who they say is one member of the British shadow cabinet saying, "Mike Johnson? Who's Mike Johnson?" And I got to admit, I'd heard the name before, although it's kind of a ubiquitous name. I didn't know a lot about him either, but he got elected, and here to talk with us about that, of course, Chad Oban, co-hosting on Friday, and our Congressman Kelly Armstrong, who went through that. Fair to call it a debacle, Kelly? I mean, I don't know that anyone was real happy with that process.
I think I called it the biggest cell phone in the history of partisan politics.
Yeah, not good. Do you are you confident in the leadership now that's? I mean, I know you put out a statement and that congratulating him and some words of encouragement. I mean, but do you think that process really picked the best possible leader for the Speaker of the House?
We picked the leader, and I think Mike has one unique thing going for him in that he can disagree with you without being disagreeable. He's really smart. As a sophomore congressman, he ran the largest caucus in our conference. He got elected to the RSC chairmanship, and he also did that job really well. I served with him on judiciary. He's subcommittee chair on Constitution, on the Constitution. Was obviously on there when we did Mueller, shift secret bunker, impeachment, all of those things. He has a very good reputation within and amongst the conference, and I think he did a good job. Now let's talk about how we got there. We took out our speaker mid-conference, the most prolific fundraiser in the history of the Republican Party. Then we took out our second in command, Steve Scalise, who is the second most prolific fundraiser and the second in command in our party. We took out Jim Jordan, who is a conservative folk hero with our base. And then we took out Tom Emmer, our whip and former chair of the NRCC, who is our third best fundraiser in the party. So I think Mike will do a very good job. I think this is a really tough situation, and I think the process was absolutely stupid.
Kelly, I know several Mike Johnsons. None of them are currently Speaker of the House. I'd never heard of this Mike Johnson at all. He hasn't been in Congress for that long. He doesn't have the deep relationships you'd usually have when you become Speaker of the House, and the government's potentially shutting down in about 30 days. How does this guy succeed in very, very short term, really consequential stuff? That's not even talking about Gaza and Ukraine and all these other things. How does he make this work without those pre-established relationships?
Well, he has pre-established relationships in the Republican Party. In the conference. We got an appropriations bill across the floor yesterday. I think even some of our most eccentric members recognize that because of the last month, we are going to have to figure out what a CR looks like moving forward. We will do an Israel package, I would guess, maybe next week, if not shortly thereafter. So you get through those two things first, and then we're going to start working on the rest of our appropriations bills. And for all the chaos, Chad, and all of the other things going on in the House, we've passed 5 approps bills, which is 5 more than the Senate has moved yet. So, there really are those things. But I think one of the things is that because, when I was helping try and get Jim Jordan across the finish line and recognized pretty quickly when that was going down, I sat in my office and I made a list of our 221 members of Congress that I thought had the mental acumen and the ability to do this job that didn't have 4 enemies in the Republican conference. And I came up with 2 names, and one of them was Mike. So He has a shot at doing this. I've never heard him light anybody on fire. I mean, he'll cut to the quick. He's a really smart lawyer, but he's also not interested. One of the reasons I think a lot of people haven't heard of him is because he's not interested in being Twitter famous. And I think that's a good thing.
It is a good thing. You know, one thing that has concerned me a little bit, though, is his position on the 2020 election. He was very much in former President Donald Trump's camp when it came to questioning the outcome of the election. He's been described in the New York Times as being one of the architects of the efforts to overturn.
Well, first of all, he became an architect right about the time he got talked about being speaker. Prior to that, I mean, you guys nobody in the media has been calling him an architect on that for the last 3 years.
Okay, I mean that's fair.
Yeah.
I think both of the people interviewing you on this call didn't really know much about Mike Johnson, period, before this. So that's what's being put out there. I don't think there's any question that he supported the effort to question the 2020 election. Here's what really concerns me is we get to November, or I guess January 2025. We've had the 2024 election, assuming it was Donald Trump was on the ballot and he loses. Is Speaker Johnson someone we could count on to certify a fair election, even though Donald Trump lost?
Well, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals about that. I will say the way he did it is the way you're supposed to do it. He filed an amicus brief with the Supreme Court. And keep in mind, I didn't sign the brief. I disagreed with it. I thought it was, I disagreed with the legal analysis. I disagreed with all of it, but it was good faith. It was, it was a legal argument, one I happened to disagree with. And I think in the short term, Mike is an institutionalist. Mike cares deeply about this country. Mike is a patriot, and we will, hopefully the Republican will win the nomination and win the presidency, so we won't have to worry about that.
So Kelly, watching this process, and I think I appreciate your transparency about your frustration with the process. But when you all got past McCarthy, Scalise, Jordan, then the guy was Emmer, and you saw everywhere across sort of political analysis saying, yeah, Emmer would be good, but he's got no chance because he voted to certify the election. Are we really in a place like somebody like you who certified the election can't lead this caucus?
No, but I think you can go back a little bit. And this is where I was talking about not being Twitter famous. These are all the same. I mean, these guys all came after me, too, when I voted not, because I thought a $16 million fine on Adam Schiff violated 3 clauses of the U.S. Constitution, so I wouldn't vote for it. And it happened to Steve Scalise, too. And I mean, I gave Jim Jordan's nominating speech, but Steve Scalise is a true conservative and is by all accounts a conservative Republican. And the minute there was an opponent, he became part of the swamp. He was too close to McCarthy, all of that. So much of that is driven by, quite frankly, people who have very little knowledge of how DC works and are really, really more interested. I mean, and there's one yesterday too. Some guy just made up a story that Mark Meadows wore a wire as chief of staff for President Trump, and there's no backup to it. And it's been all over everywhere. And it's the age we live in, and it's really unfortunate right now.
Well, there's another story right now about Speaker Johnson, and apparently he had an adopted son has an adopted son who is black. And somebody, it was in fact a left-wing blogger who I'm very familiar with, brought it up and said, well, this adopted son is not in any of the campaign literature. He's not in any of the family photos, et cetera, et cetera. And brought it up and made an issue out of it. And Speaker Johnson said, well, that's because my adopted son, who is an adult, decided he didn't want his image to be part of the campaign, and he's allowed to make that decision as an adult. That's a perfectly, I guess my point is, that's the sort of nonsense I think that comes from both sides at times. That's really
and he's been very open about it.
Yeah.
He's talked about it in committee. I mean, when you're in judiciary, you talk about race issues, you talk about those hot button issues, and he's been very open about all of that.
Yeah. So, I thought that was kind of nonsense, but I mean, are you worried at all though that, Donald Trump can kind of put the hit out? I mean, put the knife in someone like Tom Emmer and just kind of, marshal his forces and push somebody like that out?
So the timing of that is a little off. I think Emmer's candidacy was in real trouble before Donald Trump said anything. I was part of those conversations, trying to see where we were and where we were going. But whether it's the president or it's these Twitter bros that exist, I mean, these anonymous Twitter accounts with 3 million followers could actually move things on our side of the aisle right now. And it's really, and by the way, people got real threats. We had members of Congress that had to have security at their house. And that is not okay, simply for an internal election within the Republican conference. And I'm more worried about, between blowing up schedules. And listen, in the realm of sacrifices, this isn't a huge one, but my son went through an entire football season. I never saw a game.
Yeah.
Because we're doing this crazy, insane type of, there's a reason nobody had ever done a motion to vacate before. Turns out when you do a coup without a successor, all you have is chaos.
Kelly, you brought up your support of Jim Jordan, and I think it's going to come as no shock to you that I don't understand you supporting Jim Jordan. Shocking, I know. But you've also been criticized in a couple letters to the editor for your support of Jim Jordan. You and I have talked about this. I think that this is sort of a relationship sort of thing. But can you talk about why you supported Jim Jordan, what your relationship is with Jim Jordan? Again, I don't get it, but that of course I don't get it, right?
So, but what you guys see, right, is the partisan brawler. You see him in committee, you see him on Fox News, it's judiciary, it's oversight, and all of that, by the way, is beloved by our base. But what I see, I served under him on 3 different committees. And if every committee in D.C. worked like Jim Jordan treats the members of his committee, this place would be a better place. Prior to big hearings, we don't, how most hearings go. They go in seniority, the guy who's been on there last. We don't talk about whatever you're going to ask. Jim would have every member and their staff in for 3, 4, 5 hours before big hearings, coordinating how you do it, breaking it down by topic, doing it. About 70%, maybe more than that, of anything that people take seriously about me in DC is really because Jim Jordan let me operate as a freshman from North Dakota in some of the most high stress environments. I've told the people this story a lot, and I'll tell it again. Jim Jordan was my biggest surprise in Congress when I got there. Being a state party chair and dealing with that stuff and seeing what everybody else sees on TV, I was really probably had the same opinion of him. A lot of people. He was my biggest surprise. I ended up working closer. I've spent more congressional time with Jim Jordan than any other member of Congress, and he's turned into a really close dear friend. And I'm still convinced he would have surprised a lot of people on both sides of the aisle about how good he would have been at that job.
After coming through the last month of chaos, do you think it's understandable that a lot of American voters might be asking why they should give a congressional majority to Republicans, or at least a House majority to Republicans, when they have this much trouble even deciding who's going to lead the caucus, let alone, thorny issues like budgets, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I said this. One, I'll start with, if we walk into a shutdown in 17 days, we'll go from the biggest cell phone in partisan politics to the next biggest cell phone in the history of partisan politics. So that really kind of is the litmus test. Two things. One, your alternative is Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi. So sometimes nothing is better than the alternative. And two, again, we've passed 5 approach bills. The Senate still hasn't moved one. But I don't think the chaos is helpful electorally. I don't think it's helpful for Congress's image with the American people. And I hope we don't ever do something like this again.
Kelly, talking about appropriations bill, there's an article in Politico a few days ago that you were quoted. I think it's the USDA and FDA budget.
Yep.
There's some controversy in your caucus around
mifepristone.
Yeah, and so basically that's a oral abortion pill, essentially. Yep. Is what that is. And so we're in a situation where it appears to me that in your conference there's a fight over social issues that is affecting USDA. Does some pretty good work in North Dakota. How does that end? Your quote was essentially, this bill dies if that section is in, and this bill dies if that section's not in, because you lose different parts of the conference.
That's the problem. that's a problem with a 4-vote majority, and they're going to. I mean, by the way, we've already voted on agapropes on the floor, and it failed, and we had a lot of farm state members that voted against it, particularly like in Iowa and some different issues because of the cuts they didn't like in that. I didn't like all the cuts either. I think it got cut to the bone. I want to move the appropriate bill so we can get to conference and have a final bill. I always tell people that judge it on the final product, not the one that comes out. But really, with agapropes, Chad, that's the answer, right? And I try to be honest with people. Mifeprestone's a binary issue. If it stays in the bill, it fails. If it comes out of the bill, it fails. But the way the appropriations process works, like we haven't passed. I mean, both the House and the Senate haven't passed all 12 of their appropriation bills in something like 30 years. I mean, we'll have a tough time with HHS, and I think we'll have a tough time with agapropes. But
no, I think
try and get everyone through, but it's a problem.
Yeah, you cut out there for a moment there, Kelly, but I think we got the gist of it. I'm wondering if Congress maybe needs a single issue bill amendment so that we don't have abortion pills in the ag bill.
Well, it's ag and USDA. That's part of it. It actually, fits into some of those things. When people talk about single issue bills, they mean single subject appropriations bills. Again, that's a little bit of a bunch of people who actually don't read the bills talking about the bills on Twitter.
So what do you, obviously, I was reading an article. It says some of the first things Speaker Johnson's going to be facing, obviously you're going to be facing, the House of Representatives is going to be facing, is a bunch of votes on censures and expulsions. Guide us through that. What's going on with that?
Well, there's a motion to expel George Santos. There's a motion to censure Rashida Tlaib. We'll probably bring something on Jamal Bowman. I'll take heat from everywhere because I think we have an ethics committee for a reason, and we should probably let them do their work. So I think I'm not Jamal Bowman's boss. I'm not Rashida Tlaib's boss, and I'm not George Santos's boss. I think George Santos should resign. I think Rashida Tlaib should be appalled, and her constituents should be appalled and embarrassed about what she said. I think the Jamal Bowman thing is ridiculously juvenile and has no place in the halls of Congress. I think all of those things are true. I also think we set up the only truly bipartisan committee in Congress is the ethics committee. And they actually do the work behind closed doors and not in the public sphere. Oh, it turns out I used to be a defense attorney. And I think we should take the recommendations from that committee and let them do their work. And I think we should stay very clear of making sure 750,000 people anywhere in the country are without representation so we can score cheap political points.
Well, and I also think, going back to Rob's point about should the GOP be trusted to run the House of Representatives, you've just had 3 weeks without a speaker, right, where very little was done, even though you did pass appropriations bills before you had that issue. And now you're going to spend another week sort of reprimanding these people.
Yeah, but these don't take a week. These are privileged motions. It takes 25 minutes on the floor.
Kelly, what do you think the public is going to think you guys are doing during this time, right?
But that's right. That's what gets covered. And even when we're doing a lot of work, I get that question on oversight. Do you think the American people really think about these investigations as the number one thing? Well, yeah, but the oversight committee doesn't write the farm bill.
Right.
The censure of, or I guess potential expulsion of Representative Santos really interests me because he's under a criminal indictment now, and I think for Republicans especially, that's a difficult thing. I was watching on the Senate side, obviously with Senator Menendez, and you had some pretty high profile Republicans come out and say, "Oh, we shouldn't rush to judgment on him," et cetera, which I guess makes sense, but I kind of feel like they're saying it because they don't want to rush to judgment on Donald Trump. And now we have George Santos. So we're going to expel George Santos from Congress for lying about all sorts of things. And now he's under indictment. So why would, if you do that, and maybe you're not going to do that, probably you're not going to do that.
I don't know. By the way, that's being brought by Republicans.
Right. Okay. So then when do Republicans apply that thinking to Donald Trump?
Well, we don't control Donald Trump as a caucus. Our caucus rules are pretty clear, and we've done this, by the way, and we've done it very recently. Matt Fortenberry from Nebraska was charged with felonies, and he I believe he voluntarily pulled himself off of those committees. But the minute he pled guilty, we kicked him out. Like, we are very, because otherwise you get in, and obviously this is where I live, right? This is my worldview on these issues. Accusations and convictions are two different things. They just simply are. And until somebody's convicted or the ethics committee comes out with a recommendation, we're allowing rank and file members who know the same thing you and I know about it, but might not necessarily know everything about it. The Jamal Bowman one's a little interesting because not only did he get caught lying, but he got caught removing the signs. I don't know if we're going to kick people out of Congress for misdemeanors, though. We might have some serious problems. But I just think it's easy for me to say, you're convicted, I think you should be done. You're accused, I think you should have due process. And I'm going to treat that the same way. The censures are a little different because there are certain things that I think you can, hold people accountable for what they say.
You know, we have a debate about this all the time where, because obviously, I mean, you've done a lot of work in criminal defense. Mm-hmm. I've done some work in criminal defense. I really respect that. But also sometimes I look at it and I think, well, politics is not the criminal justice system. And
nope.
and serving in an elected office is not a right. It's a privilege. And so I struggle sometimes. Do I need a conviction all the time to?
I think Senator Mendez and George Santos should both resign. I
agree.
think they cannot. I think they cannot effectively represent their constituents at this point.
Yeah. Okay.
But Rob, regardless, I mean, politics is not. But if you start setting litmus tests without clearly defined rules in a partisan body, I very much worry that the majority is. I mean, this was the same thing when the majority wouldn't let certain people on January 6th committee. And then we go to Intel and all of that. I mean, once you do these things, there's always going to be a re-up response, and you never reset to level zero.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anybody's noticed, but the way American politics is right now, I have a feeling the House of Representatives is probably going to change hands more than a couple times in the next 20 years.
So I think the one thing I'm pleased with is all three of us agree Menendez and Santos should not be representing any Americans in Congress. That seems to be bipartisan support for that. Kelly, there's another mass shooting in Maine over the last 24 to 48 hours. I think we've talked about this before. You're probably one of the few people in Congress who, unfortunately, probably missed lots of hunting season this year, being in Washington for the speaker votes. But, I mean, is there going to be, I assume there's going to be another push for some sort of gun legislation, gun safety. Obviously, we don't know everything going on in Maine, but it just seems like when one of these tragedies takes place, we get back on the hamster wheel of having the same conversation. Do we get anywhere?
I don't know. I mean, obviously, this is a really uniquely different situation with how the gun was possessed and his background, and also being in mental health. I mean, it sounds like he was in inpatient treatment very shortly before this. And that is, to me, like, one of the problems with red flag laws is the concept of a red flag law is not offensive. The problem is, and again, this goes much more to how I used to deal with protection orders and pro se protection orders and, interim protection orders. The due process associated with those things is almost non-existent. And you cannot create a system in which that works. And that I have never seen one written in a way which I would ever be comfortable with it. But I don't know. I mean, I think, you saw Jared Golden come out and deal with, and he changed his stance on that. But I mean, this isn't even the other side of this. I don't think any gun control legislation that would have been provided or put out there would have had any effect on this guy and his ownership and possession of that weapon. I think the real question, which we need to have answered, is how in hell, I mean, I don't know Maine's laws, but how the hell do you go from inpatient psychiatric treatment to without any of those things coming on the back end? And I don't know the answer to that, Chad.
When I've heard that Maine has something called a yellow flag law, which is I don't know how it's different than a red flag law. I assume it means it's not quite as stringent, but I've heard, I mean, the guy had the guns, he got out of treatment and they just didn't take the guns away. Right. I mean, he owned them beforehand. He didn't buy them after he got out.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a real question. And I mean, also he obviously had more training, I think, than others had before and was severely mentally ill.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what makes it terrifying. I mean, he has a weapon. He's got the severely mentally ill, plus he's trained in a way that most people aren't to cause this kind of damage.
One of the most confounding things about all of this, whether we're talking about, and I can actually find a through line from George Santos and Senator Menendez to the shootings, is how much of this is being driven. Like, how do you stop people who are just choosing to do the wrong things? Like, we can't, George Santos should resign, right? Senator Menendez should resign. Like, these are decisions. They should make the decision to have some honor and have some integrity and have some shame and resign. And also people should decide not to exercise whatever mental illness or racism or political extremism or religious extremism, whatever it is that's motivating them to go out and perpetrate these mass attacks. They should also do it. I think so much of what's going on in our society right now that I really struggle with is how much of it is just driven by people who are just refusing to follow normal societal mores, I guess. I don't know how to control it. Because I don't want to get to a point where we're controlling individuals. I want people to have freedom, but also what do you do with people who are exercising that freedom in a way that's just completely they don't care about the guardrails the rest of us care about?
Two things. Three actually. Two things in politics and media. Shame and hypocrisy used to be really good self-regulating things. Being called a hypocrite used to be the worst thing in the world, right? I mean, and they're not anymore. And that is both with particularly the DC media and a lot of these celebrity reporters trying to be part of the story instead of reporting. The two people who know how many Twitter followers and clicks they have more than maybe anybody else in the world are DC politicians and DC reporters. And the second thing to this is we are going to find out, I think, sometime in the future, how incredibly damaging predatory algorithms have been to our discourse. And COVID and locked up and people seeing things online. If you have 1 million followers, what you say is truth because of your million. I mean, the law of compounding averages just makes that stuff go everywhere. And I did my research. No, you didn't. You watched a YouTube video. That's not, there are so many different things about that. And then the government's reaction to that stuff. I know what a lie is. I don't know what disinformation is. I am on these committees that talks about what it is and what it isn't. And there sure doesn't really seem to be there doesn't seem to be a real definition of what that is. So you have a lot of this crap out there, and that's what it is. And it exists and it moves through the ether at a speed that is faster than anything you see. And then in typical government fashion, the reaction is to tamp it down, which actually has the opposite effect. During COVID, peer-reviewed medical studies were being taken offline. That is never a good idea. Never a good idea. And then the distrust just feeds and builds and feeds and builds. And I'm not taking the human factor out of it. We should all do a lot better at it. But the way this stuff moves is so fast and so terribly corrosive. And I don't care if you're a 16-year-old in high school getting bullied or somebody believing something that has no basis in fact, but has been viewed 10 million times online.
There's that old saying from a Supreme Court opinion that the solution to speech you don't like is more speech.
There's always more speech.
Right. But right now it feels like that's not workable anymore. I say this as a free speech absolutist. I don't want to curtail anyone's speech, but it's the good speech is really having a hard time catching up to the bad speech, which I think is the point you're trying to make.
But you're seeing it on both ends of the spectrum with the Israeli-Hamas conflict right now. And there is some of the most abhorrent things being done. Can you imagine being a Jewish student at Harvard right now? Can you imagine that?
I saw a video of Jewish students.
Little brats that have no actual concept of what goes on in that part of the world doing these things, doing that. But then the flip side to that is you have other places saying we're banning any of these protests. We can't do that either. Well, and you can't do that either.
Yeah, Kelly, during this last special session, there was a resolution in support of Israel, and people wanted to put in language that said it also protects innocent Palestinians. and that was shot down. And that frustrates me as well. I mean, we should be able to just agree innocent people shouldn't be killed on either side of this thing moving forward.
Well, then I would tell Hamas to let them leave Gaza, though. I mean, that's what, Chad, I don't disagree with that. I mean, I thought, stop the presses. I thought Kirby's press conference, was it yesterday or the day before, was actually really good. And I have not always been impressed with him. Most of the time I'm not. But that's what he said. I mean, but the innocent loss of life is going to happen. I think the ground war is probably starting as we speak. But I can tell you this: if Hamas let all the Palestinian civilians leave Gaza, Israel wouldn't stop them. They would actually beg them to leave.
I know we're right up against the time we have with you, Kelly. I wanted to ask one last question. It's kind of in the vein of what we've been talking about. Attorney General Drew Wrigley actually announced, and I think the news was out a little before, but he announced that North Dakota is joining a lawsuit with other states against Meta, which is the parent company of Facebook, over essentially some of the things we're talking about, the algorithms and what it's done to children and things like that. And that's specifically focused on children, not so much adults. But I know that's a little out of your wheelhouse, but you're an attorney. You've dealt with this policy area in Congress. What do you think of that? I mean, at some point, are these companies, should they be accountable? Should they be liable for what's happening on their platforms?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's different ones. I think we should look at them differently. I haven't had a chance to review that, but there's some real antitrust things that I think we have to look at between Google and Facebook. That case is being brought in Missouri and all of that. I haven't seen this. I think Snapchat has some real issues with, drug dealing in particular and those types of things. I think one of the things you have to look at, and I will look at the suit. I'm assuming if Drew joined it, it's probably, I mean, there's an argument to be made there, but I haven't actually studied it yet. And I think states are actually going to start figuring some of this stuff out. But I think we're going to find, I mean, in some ways, I think this will be a little bit like tobacco litigation. In that, when they come in and tell me they can't tell you if you're 18 or not, I roll my eyes and I get angry, because after about 50 uses on that platform, they can tell you what day your birthday is. Like, the amount of information that they are capable, and by the way, that's Amazon, that's Meta, it's all of them. So hiding behind that crutch is complete garbage. It's not true. And if they are doing those things, particularly to minors, when they are supposed to have protections in place for people under the 18, then I think you're going to see an ability to get some liability. They should face some liability.
Well, that's all the time we got, Kelly. Thank you so much, as always. Certainly appreciate it. We covered a lot of ground there. But yeah, this is fun. Certainly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Hey, and Kelly, congrats on being able to come back to North Dakota for a little while.
Yeah, and there's snow in October.
Yeah, there it is.
Well,
so some of the DC people that are out here are going to get a real North Dakota experience.
You've really been in DC for a while. You forgot you lived in North Dakota, where we get snow in October.
We've been in for 7 weeks in a row, and you can tell people are really, really frustrated.
Yeah.
And people still have. People have families and lives, and I get really mad whenever they say it's a recess.
Well, there's work for you to do in the state too. Obviously,
I represent a whole state. If you guys think I'm sitting on my couch playing PlayStation when I'm at home in North Dakota, well, you two know me well enough to know that's not what happens. But
well, it sounds lovely though, doesn't it?
I think for like half a day it'd be great, and then I'd get bored really quick.
There you go.
Well, you should add me on PlayStation. We could be friends and play games together.
I haven't turned my son's place. I haven't played my son's PlayStation in probably 8 months. I haven't had a chance to do it once in a while.
All right, Kelly, thanks so much.
Hi there, my name is James Wallner. I produce and host the podcast Dakota Spotlight, a true crime podcast that tackles historical and unsolved crimes in the upper Midwest. Follow along with me as we search for a missing girl, attempt to solve a 45-year-old murder, and much, much more. That's Dakota Spotlight Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, or at inforum.com/podcasts.
Just finished up with Congressman Armstrong and the mess from Washington, D.C., and I think that's about enough talking about that, don't you, Chad? I'm glad that period of American politics is over.
Let's be clear. I'm happy for Kelly that he's back in North Dakota for a little while. I can only imagine sitting in D.C. getting absolutely nothing done, trying to count to 217 is not why somebody runs for Congress.
Yeah, well, exactly. Special session wrapped up this week. They got it done in 3 days, which I think was nice. Governor Burgum was chapped, I think is the right word.
Somebody said he had a temper tantrum. Do you know who that person was?
Oh, that was me. I think it was. I mean, if you the press conference he did, I listened to a lot of the audio, and he was upset. And I know a lot of people were saying that it was about his presidential campaign. I think he really, that policy, what he wanted, expansion of that income tax, that is right in line with where he's been politically. I don't think he's doing anything special because of the presidential campaign. I think maybe some of the intensity he felt about it is driven by, and maybe it's frustration with his presidential campaign, which is not, let's be honest, is not going anywhere. But I mean, clearly he had some emotion about that, and it didn't work out, and he was upset, very upset about it.
Yeah, and I mean, you and I disagree on the policy, right? I think it's a bad policy. You think it's a good policy, but we both agree this was not the time to do this.
Not in special session. No, not in special session. And even though it was, you could argue it was just an expansion of something that had already been debated and passed, but it's a pretty big expansion. So that was it close to 100 million?
And they just made the decision to do the first, let's let that one go. I mean, it's not like he hasn't gotten significant income tax relief in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
For people moving forward. I also think, the frustration he felt, maybe it wasn't about the presidential campaign, but, he hasn't announced he's running for re-election. Does he want to go back and fight with legislators over things like this? In 2025.
Yeah, as a personal matter.
But I'll tell you, Rob, I know you and Ben talked about the special session quite a bit on Wednesday. One of the things that I found sort of interesting, I was impressed that they're able to stay focused. That I had no confidence in that.
Well, and by the way, kudos to them. They did a good job.
Yeah. Kudos to them. One of the things I thought was interesting, though, what happened on the PERS board, we knew that was going to happen. That was sort of predictable. But to see them stand up one after another on the floor and blame the PERS board for why they were back in the special session, not recognizing the fact they were back there was because they were doing something that was not constitutional. PERS was just the people who sued to make it happen. But there was almost not a recognition that they'd been doing something wrong, but instead that damn PERS board, if they just wouldn't have sued, we wouldn't be here right now. And that, I thought that was sort of silly. But overall, I think the special session went about as well as I would have hoped. Get in and get out.
The PERS board stuff, I agree with you. As someone who's obviously on the other side of that issue from you, the reason they came back in special session was not the PERS board, really. The court never even got to ruling on the argument that was at the center of the PERS board argument, which was the violation of separation of powers. And I still don't think the PERS board's going to get anywhere with that.
I don't think they're going to be able to sue on that anymore because of the change in the PERS board with the 4 legislators and the governor's appointees being removed. I can't imagine the PERS board is going to approve going forward with another lawsuit to challenge that same thing.
Yeah, well, it might not. And by the way, what we're talking about are the lawmakers who were appointed. They argued that it's a separation of powers issue. It was pointed out during the floor debate in both chambers. We do that all over state government. We have members of the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch all serving on some of the same boards. So,
but that doesn't make it necessarily constitutional, right? Just because it's happening and hasn't been challenged doesn't mean that it's constitutional.
Maybe, but North Dakota doesn't have the same language about separation of powers that some other states have. I don't know. That's a whole in the weeds legal argument that is not germane here. The point I was trying to make, the reason the legislature was called back into special session is because they violated the state constitution.
Right.
And it was really in a way that wasn't even related specifically to, it just happened to come up in the PERS lawsuit, but it wasn't even related. They've been doing this for years.
Yeah, anybody could have sued and made the same point.
And there's plenty of blame for that to go around. We had Josh Boucher on the podcast. He said, "Oh yeah, Democrats." He goes, "I've done horse trading in the OMB budget. We've all been doing it."
I think we got to be a little bit careful when the legislature is 85% Republicans to say, well, Democrats are to blame too. Democrats ain't passing a lot of
I
stuff.
didn't say they were to blame. I said they've been doing it too. And Josh said, I mean, kudos to Josh. Everybody's been doing it. Everybody's been doing and I don't even blame anybody who's in the legislature now. Like whoever, it'd been doing for so long. You get elected, it's like, oh, this is the way we do it. I guess here we go. So I don't know, like that issue. I do think it's going to be interesting to see, but we've talked probably enough about the legislative session, the special session. So that's done. Although I do wonder if we're going to get another one if the federal courts hand down. I've been seeing some rulings coming out from other states about redistricting. That doesn't necessarily mean that North Dakota's redistricting case is the same as theirs, but there is a lawsuit. And if the feds order us to draw the lines again, we're going to have to come back in again before 2025.
What I'm guessing the governor is not going to be too quick to be the one that calls him back in after not getting what he wanted from the legislature. The legislature might have to do this on their own time.
In they have 5 days left? So
I think so. But they should be able to do that in 5 days, I would think.
You would think. I don't know. And I mean, that's such a hard thing because you have, like, there were Native American groups who were very pleased with what the legislature did with the sub-districts. In fact, I remember former state rep Ruth Buffalo saying that, standing up on the floor and talking about how happy she was with it. I remember Three Affiliated Tribes chairman Mark Fox putting out a statement with how happy he was with it. But then you have other Turtle Mountain and Spirit Lake, I believe. They're the ones who filed the lawsuits. So they're clearly not happy. So I don't want to compare it to other states, like, there's some pretty blatant racial stuff going on. I don't think that's the case here.
Yeah, Rob, I think this stuff is so complicated. I'm not even going to pretend to understand the federal laws around gerrymandering. I think that we'll see what the court says. I think
sometimes, honestly, it's so subjective. I think don't get me wrong, there are some clearly very egregious examples of gerrymandering that we could point to in other states. I think sometimes, though, it's in the eye of the beholder. So
for sure.
Anyway, okay, so let's talk about something that's going on in the NDGOP right now. Which actually
there's something going on with the NDGOP? Yeah. What a strange thing to talk about.
I have been writing a lot of stories about the NDGOP to the consternation of a lot of people in the NDGOP who don't. I think they call me a disreputable journalist or something like that. I don't know.
You've been getting some props from left-wing letter writers, and who else did Zaleski mention you?
Jack Zaleski, who once wrote an editorial for the Forum cracking a fat joke at my expense. He called me a portly blogger. A play on my last name, and I think my response was that it was the first accurate thing that he had published in a month. And now I work
singing your praises.
And now in some strange turn of events, I work for the Forum, and he thinks I'm an incredible journalist. So I don't know. We are through the looking glass, but okay. So what's happening now? The last time we checked in with the NDGOP, their executive director Samantha Hawley, who by the way was well liked, widely seen, not terribly ideological. I think she was one of, she's described to me as herself. She just enjoyed working for the party. Like, she liked the organizing aspects of it. She liked a lot of those things that happened in the background. I mean, she has her convictions, but she wasn't picking sides, really. Like, she was just there to do the work. She left after conflict with incoming chair Sandy Sanford. So they go and they hire a new person. His name's Dave Roatman. He is out of South Dakota politics. And the first thing I wrote about him was that he was a divisive figure because down in South Dakota, he started a group to take on Republican incumbents, kind of some of the things that have been happening in the North Dakota Republican Party, where you have one faction of Republicans wanting to take out the other faction. So you have all that going on. I wrote about that. And then he wrote a tweet about me, calling me a Democratic blogger and kind of dismissing. And while I happened to be on his Twitter account, because people sent me a link to this thing, while I happened to be on his Twitter account, I noticed he had some very interesting Twitter activity. And when I say interesting, I mean kind of stomach turning. Like, he's got, first of all, this is like a middle-aged man, and he's just got all these thirsty posts on women in scantily attired women, just one after another, just like, she seems nice, she seems nice, she seems nice. Like, just like commenting like that. He has jokes about women making sandwiches, jokes about women shouldn't have gotten the right to vote. He responded to a post about a news article about Black Americans maybe wanting to leave the country. He said that they should go to Wakanda. And by the way, my story about this is up. I have all of the tweets, close to 100 of them in a file. You can click and you can read them all. I'm just kind of shocked that this guy was doing this right out in the open, first of all. And second of all, that he got hired by the North Dakota Republican Party, which clearly didn't do a lot of vetting on the person that they were hiring.
Well, and Rob, didn't he tell you that he stands by everything, that a man of his words or something like that, and stands by what he's posted or something like that? I mean, I think, quite frankly, you calling from my conversations I've had with people in South Dakota, I think you calling him divisive might have been a nicer thing you could say. It sounds like this guy doesn't have the best reputation in political circles down in South Dakota. And, you know, him liking and the scantily clad women, wasn't there an attorney general's candidate last election cycle, Tim Lamb, who had some similar issues on Twitter?
And by the way, I wrote that story too.
Yeah, it's like these guys don't realize that what they're doing on social media, people can see that stuff, and it's not appropriate for a 50-year-old dude to be doing that sort of stuff online. Not to mention racist comments online, sexist comments online. Come on, man. We're better than this.
I mean, there's a part of me that's glad they're doing it out in the open, because thank you for the window into how you actually feel so that we can all judge you for it.
And Rob, I would say, as a former executive director of a political party, the executive director of a political party does not want to be the news story. The goal of a staff person at a political party is to make your candidates look good, not to have the story about you looking like you're a fool. How's that?
So when I wrote my article, what I led with was the fact that the North Dakota Republican Party earlier this month voted to get rid of their code of conduct. And I think that this is a shameful thing. I hope that the party moves on from this guy, because he's clearly not fit to have a leadership position in a political party. If I were a Republican, I would not want this guy represent. I say that if I were a Republican, all my critics are now like, Port said he's not a Republican.
Yeah, you finally admitted it.
Yeah, I'm independent. It's not my place to speak for the Republican Party. I'm an observer. But if I were like an elected member or like a card-carrying member of the Republican Party, I would be upset, and I would not want this person representing me. But this feeds into, I think, a lot of what we were talking about in the last segment with Congressman Armstrong, where's the shame? Where's the shame right now? Because, the party got rid of its code of conduct. That happened after Brandon Pritchard, State Representative Brandon Pritchard, went on a completely misogynistic tirade on Twitter, talking about how he wants to put Christ as king in the code, and the only thing we should teach about LGBTQ curriculum in schools is Sodom and Gomorrah and all this stuff. And then also, by the way, got called out by the University of Minnesota Law School, lying about being a student there, an enrolled student there. So, I mean, where's the shame? And then you go all the way up to the top, where Donald Trump, who has been found civilly liable for sexual assault, is a serial philanderer, has had multiple associates, testify that they, and plead guilty to felonies, saying that they helped him try to overturn the 2020 election. He's under dozens and dozens of criminal indictments. That guy is the front runner in the GOP field. Where's the shame?
Yeah, where's the shame? And, one of the questions I would have in regards to this gentleman that was hired to be the exec, and Sandy Sanford, I assume, does not hire the executive director in a vacuum. I mean, that's certainly not how it worked on the Democrat side. Is it the policy committee or, an extended committee that makes the hire? Are state legislators on that committee? Are representatives from Burgum or Hoven or Kramer hire? And if so, why didn't they do vetting? I don't know if they were part of the decision, but certainly if I'm one of those guys that's going to be on the ballot in 2024 as a Republican, I'm not sure I want this gentleman with his background representing the party I'm running.
Right. Like
with.
doing like handling the communications, responding, because sometimes the party's in a position where, the Democrats launch I want to say attack, but just the normal political stuff. Like they put out a thing, the give and take back and forth. That gets heated sometimes. That gets very stressful. You know it. You've been through it. I've covered it. It gets stressful. It gets emotional. You want this guy in the middle of that during the heat of the battle? You want this guy with access to the party's social media platforms?
Or if you're a candidate who's running and the Dems attack you, and sometimes you want the party to respond on behalf of a candidate. I mean, if you're one of these statewide Republicans, you want this person in the press speaking on behalf of you. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And Rob, what did Sandy Sanford say when you reached out to her? Basically said the guy's a grown up and he can speak for himself.
I'm gonna pull up the text string. So I first of all, I sent an email to her and Ellie Ottenmeyer, and I forgive me, Ellie, if I'm pronouncing. I think it's Ottenmeyer. I'm forgetting now. I apologize. That's my fault. I sent an email to both of them. I sent them a zip file of the entire, like, all the tweet that said, do you think these are appropriate? Like, just an immediate inquiry. Didn't get a response to that. I said, listen, I'm publishing this on noon on Friday. Like, I'm gonna send it. I'm gonna file it. It's gonna get published. She came back, or I didn't hear anything. So about 11:50, shortly before noon today, as we're recording this on Friday, 27th, I finally, I tried calling her and then I tried texting her, and she texted me back. She goes, oh, here, let me pull it up. She says, Mr. Port, missed a call, busy with kids. And I said, well, I'm certain you saw my email, and I was hoping that you would have some answers to my questions. And then she said, well, this content is not on his X or social media. Where is it from? And I said, well, it is on his X account. By the way, X is Twitter. I think we all know that by now. Mr. Rotman has already responded to my inquiry about these posts, indicating he stands by them. And then she says, yes, did receive your email. I said, do you have comment? We were not aware. And I said, okay, any further comment? And she said, I quote, until you provided, we were not aware of these comments. They appear to not be his tweets on his account, but buried comments to other tweets. Mr. Rotman is an adult, and he can answer for himself beyond this. And then she offered to meet me for coffee, which was bizarre because this is somebody who's been dodging my inquiries and running my name down to everybody that she meets. That I'm this terrible person, doing bad journalism about the North Dakota Republican Party. So I don't know.
So how does she say these don't appear to be his? Is it because he's commenting or liking other people's tweets, right, therefore he doesn't own it?
Right. So like on Twitter, if you just write a tweet, like it just goes out on your profile and then other people. Right. But if you comment on someone else's tweet or like somebody else's tweet, like that's in another section. So I don't know what distinction she's making in his mind. He made these posts, but they were posting in reply to other people's posts.
Right.
And in her mind, that's a distinction that matters. Listen, you can go and you can look at all of the tweets I'm talking about in my column for yourself and decide how you feel about them, because I think it's pretty clear.
Inform.com.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, I did that. I put every single tweet out there. They're all in a file folder. Some of them were so explicit we didn't publish them online. I did make them available. There's a link to a Google Drive. You could go and see them all there. But not all of them are in the article because some of them, frankly, were too explicit, too offensive for us to even publish. That's where we're at right now. So I don't know. I mean, I guess to me, I'm in shock that things have gotten this bad at the North Dakota Republican Party, Chad. And when you think about like Republicans, like how much talent they have, like just about everybody in North Dakota is a Republican. Well, okay, that's exaggerating. There are a lot of Republicans in North Dakota. That's a better way to put it. And there are a lot of very smart, very good people who could take leadership positions in the party. How we got allowed this political party to get here shocks me. Like, it shocks me. And maybe it shouldn't, given everything else that's going on in Republican politics nationally. Maybe it shouldn't shock me, but it kind of shocks me a little bit.
So I'm sitting here thinking about past GOP executive directors. People like Drew Wrigley, Kevin Kramer, Jason Stavorak, Jason Flores. I mean, like really, really like substantial people. This was a job that like people would want. And it's become a job currently that I'm guessing not a lot of people want to be associated with. And it really is too bad. And part of it is sort of the one-sided nature of politics. I mean, I when I was executive director of the party, I always enjoyed running into my GOP counterpart because we had a lot of stuff in common. We disagreed, but we're dealing with a lot of the stuff. But
right, you disagreed ideologically, but like the function of
very
running a
similar.
party was very similar, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's just sort of amazing that this is sort of the quality of the candidate that they would hire for this job.
Do you think it's because I think a lot of it is Republicans take winning in November for granted. They don't have anything to fear. They don't feel like they have anything to fear from Democrats, and they're probably right most of the time. And so they just don't really feel like the party matters that much anymore.
I think part of it is, you know, who would want the job? Who would want to deal with the things that chairman and executive directors have to deal with at the GOP right now? I mean, the Jared Hendricks of the world and those kind of people whose primary goal is chaos, right? And so, you know, the people who walked out of the meeting and I mean, people saw what happened to Chairman Perry Schaefer. I mean, the dude wins everything.
Well, even
and then they run him out.
And then, has you know, continues. I mean, you could argue plenty of Republican success before he was chair, but he continued it. That's not an easy thing to do. Like, it's like your baseball team wins the World Series. Okay, do it again next year as the new manager. Like, that's not easy.
You mentioned Samantha Hawley. I'm with you. I don't know her, but I've heard nothing but good things from across the ideological spectrum. And she, you know, it's my understanding that she liked to keep the trains on the track and keep things going and doing the things you're supposed to do as a political party, but maybe not ran out, but created an environment that she didn't want to stay in. It defies logic.
Well, that's the other thing too. Like, if you're a female state law, and I do feel a little uncomfortable writing stories like this. I don't ever want to be in a position of speaking for women on an issue like this, or speaking for a black person or somebody who's been denigrated by stuff. It's not my place to speak for them, right? I'm just trying to tell a story. I'm lifting up a rock and I'm saying, hey, everybody, look what's under this rock. That's my role. My role is not to speak for them. And so I'm really uncomfortable doing that. But I mean, if you're a female Republican member of the legislature and you're looking at the sorts of things your party's executive director has been posting on Twitter, how do you feel about that?
And many of those folks just went through the Luke Simon stuff,
right,
not that long ago. And I understand not wanting to suggest that two middle-aged white guys like us understand this stuff. But one of the things, quote, in your article was him saying, quote, "Here's a quarter, keep it between your knees," unquote, in response to somebody asking about relationship advice. It's hard for me to come up with a scenario where that is an appropriate response to anything online. He endorsed groping women. I mean, again, I go back, we just went through the Luke Simons thing when he said inappropriate things, treated people like Representative O'Brien inappropriately. How does Representative O'Brien and Representative Pyle and all these different people feel after standing up to Luke Simons on the floor?
Senator Judy Lee, Senator Kristen Roars. I mean, the laundry list of competent Republican women who have been, whether I disagree with them, I agree with them. I mean, but they're leaders in our state who have earned their position in the legislature. And now,
so they get Luke Simons kicked out now that their party just hires somebody like
now this guy is in there. I'm just, but it gets back to the shame factor again. I mean, they also belong to a party of Donald Trump, who again was found civilly liable for sexual assault for rape. Mr. Grab him by the what. Yep. I mean, that is horrific. What are we doing?
But Kelly is right. I mean, when Congressman Armstrong talked about there is nothing like shame used to be the ultimate thing. Being called a hypocrite used to be the ultimate thing. Now it's like if it gives me clicks, I don't know. But it feels like they stepped in a little bit here. I would be shocked if this person is still employed by the North Dakota GOP a month from now.
Well, I guess we'll see. I mean, it's out there now. What how they respond to it is it's going to be interesting to watch. That's probably all we have time for today. So we're going to wrap it up there. Chad, thanks so much. Appreciate it as always.
Rob, it's fun.
I'm going to try to get. I mentioned the meta lawsuit from that Attorney General Wrigley has signed up North Dakota for. I think that's a really fascinating area of debate, area of public policy. I think it's wrapped up in a lot of the stuff we've been talking about today. So I'm trying to get him on the show next week. So hopefully that's going to happen. But otherwise, you know me, I'm always flying by the seat of my pants. So,
all right, Rob, go move some more snow.
Go move some more snow. That's what I got to do for the rest of the weekend. All right, thanks for listening. We'll talk again. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.